I'm Eva, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of The Charm of It, which is my podcast about knitting, both the projects I've been doing and more general knitty things. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for sticking with me. I know the schedule has been erratic lately, but I really love being able to connect with you guys when I can record. And if you're a new viewer, then I guess I would describe my podcast as for nerdy knitters. I like to go into the details of everything, and I really enjoy researching and reading and those kinds of things and talking about all of that with all of you. If you would like to get in touch with me, I am the Charm of It on Ravelry, Instagram, and my blog, which I haven't been active on in a while. So Ravelry and Instagram are the best ways to get in touch. There's also a podcast group on Ravelry if you want to connect with other viewers, and I've also gotten much better about replying to threads and encouraging conversations. So I like how in the group you can share your current projects with me. It's nice to get that two-way interaction, and Instagram as well. So feel free to message me or get in touch however you would like. I'm always looking for even more knitting friends. And you can always find the links to all of that on YouTube, assuming this is where you're watching. So I've got quite a bit of stuff, quite a few topics this week, especially since I had to wait an extra week to record because my neck and shoulders just weren't up to making a podcast last week. For new viewers, I have chronic illnesses, so that affects my capabilities. So let's get straight into finished objects. I have slowed down my knitting appreciably. Probably because we've had some warm spells and I just tend to lose my knitting mojo. But since my goal for the year was slower knitting, I'm not really going to worry about it because if I can enjoy my hobby in ways that, like if I don't finish things as quickly, then that just means that I don't have to buy as much yarn, so it becomes cheaper. And let's see. First finished object are my Dryad slipper socks. I don't think I had even started these on the last podcast. They're already covered in cat hair. Moth is continuing to molt. That's not the word, is it? Her spring shedding. Oh, come on. The focus was working before. There we go. So as you can see, these are a pretty intricate cable pattern. And the pattern is the Ivy Trellis Socks from Botanical Knits by Alana Dacos. Last Black Friday, so the day after the Thanksgiving, I noticed that the actual physical book was on sale at Barnes & Noble. And there were quite a few patterns in the book that I had wanted to make, so I decided to just go ahead. I think I got it for like $10. And this is the first pattern that I've made from it, but it will not be the last. I've already got plans for at least 2 more. And I really enjoyed making these. I chose to cast these on because I was really in the mood for some cabling. And the yarn is Cascade Heritage Silk in the Pine colorway. I wanted a pair of dark green socks because I have a pair of dark green ankle boots. Almost in focus. There we go. So that's a little lighter than real life, but it's a very true, pretty, cool green. And I can't remember if I said, but it's called Pine. I pretty much followed the pattern. I did change the cuff. I did a tubular cast on just because I really like how it looks. And 1x1 twisted rib instead of whatever the pattern recommended because it looked as if the pattern cuff didn't relate to the body anyway, so I wasn't messing up anything there. And then the heel flap, she calls for, maybe she did have a twisted rib cuff, I don't know. Anyway, for her heel flap, she calls for, sorry about the focus, for just twisted rib. And I changed it a little. So what I did, because I really like having a reinforced heel flap, which is when you slip stitches, so I slipped the knit stitches on the wrong side rows, if that makes sense. And I actually really like how this heel flap turned out. I can definitely see using it again. adding it to my already favorite eye of partridge heel. And then I think and then I always continue heel flap reinforcement down through the gusset decreases just because that's the spot where some store-bought socks have worn out. I've never had a pair of hand-knit socks wear out, but better safe than sorry. Come on, camera. I apologize for having to restart again. I'm not really sure what's going on with focusing. It's making me a little nervous. I can't really afford to replace my camera right now. Anyway, and then I just did my usual very round toe because my toes they're not that much more narrow than the rest of my foot, so there's no point in doing a dramatic decrease. It just won't fit right. So these were really fun. They took quite a while. Just because it was a charted pattern, and the chart had a nice rhythm, but I never quite memorized it. And then, it was like when you're doing that much cabling and manipulating of stitches, it's just a slower knit, which I really enjoy. So I would highly recommend this pattern. I think it was really well written. I liked the layout. The only thing I would say is that this is a 66 stitch sock, and I usually do a 60 stitch sock because I would consider my feet a women's small. I wear 6.5 to a 7 US or a 37 Euro. I think in the UK I'm a size 4, I'm not sure. But the pattern says that it's only in one size because of the complicated stitch. And it says it's for a women's medium, but these are incredibly snug on me. So if you are a true women's medium, I would recommend maybe knitting with thicker yarn and sizing up your needles because this barely goes over. Like, I have to work to get it on. Once it's on, it's perfectly fine and comfortable, but I definitely have to work to get it on. I mean, you can see how narrow that is unstretched. And I'll just try to stretch out the pattern so that you can get a better idea of what it looks like on my foot. Although, of course, there will be project photos, as always, on my Ravelry page of me wearing the sock. I don't know what is wrong with my camera. It's very frightening. Okay, so there it is stretched out. You can definitely see the leaves more clearly. I really love this stitch pattern. I like how the reverse stockinette background makes the leaves pop, and then I just think it's a really pretty, elegant pattern. Doing it in the darker yarn has made it so that you can't see the details quite as well when you're wearing it, but I think it's light enough. They're not as dark as they're appearing when they're back near my sweater. So I'm really happy with these, and I can't wait to wear them with my with my ankle boots. My next finished object is just a simple tam that I cast on because I wanted something that was pretty mindless because everything outside knitting was charted. And this is the Edgewater tam. I can't remember the name of the designer, but on one of the recent Fruity Knitting episodes she was interviewed, so that's pretty cool. And she was inspired by this hat that Mary wears in The Secret Garden, the movie version from I think the 90s, which I love. And I actually just watched it last year with my niece, and I also fell in love with Mary's super slouchy giant hat. And so I put this in my queue as soon as it came out, and it was a free pattern, and I put it in my library, and now it's a paid-for pattern. But I think it's $3. So it's really simple, but really smartly done. The way that she manages to do garter in the round without that kind of ugly jog that you get. I really like these details, and then obviously I added a little pom-pom. I don't have a pom-pom maker, and so I meant this pom-pom to be bigger, but I just wrapped my yarn the wrong way, so that's why it ended up a little small. My one concern is that this hat is quite large. And I'm not sure whether I should reknit it in a slightly smaller size. It's not the fault of the pattern. The pattern gives directions for regular or slouchy. I followed the regular directions, but my gauge was off. The designer must be a really tight knitter because I knit this throwing, and usually when I throw, I use the same needle that the designer calls for, which is usually the same needle that the yarn band recommends. And in this case, that was a size 8 to get, I think, 5 stitches to the inch. And this is Quince & Company's Lark, which is a worsted weight yarn, and I should have looked at the ball band because I think they recommend a size 7 for that gauge. So since I knitted on an 8, my gauge was slightly bigger, which is why even though I knit the regular size, it came out large. The thing is that large worsted weight hats are actually really nice for winter because all that extra air, it makes them really warm, but I'm not sure if it looks okay or if it looks silly. So let me know if you think I should reknit it or not. As I said, this is Quince & Company Lark, which is 100% wool, and I really love their Lark base. And this is the bird's egg color. I used the yarn that was left over from a sweater I knit myself, and it was Christmas present worth of yarn. I think bird's egg is just the most beautiful muted blue-green, so I'm really pleased to have a hat now to match my jacket, which, because I like matchy-matchy, I might very well wear together. And the size is growing on me. I really like how some yarns hold their block really well, so like, see, you can still you can see, woo, there we go, that how it's still a circle. I just really enjoy that. Not that I wear my hat like a halo, but I love those kinds of wool yarns. And I did follow her directions for blocking in the pattern, which have you just pat it out in a circle instead of putting it over a plate. She also said that even though the lark would stretch out while it was wet, it would shrink back when it's dry, and I did not experience that, so for what it's worth. And the little pom-pom I decided to block as well, and it made it nice and fluffy, even if it's quite small. But you know, the nice thing about the smaller one is that it shows those really cool, almost cobweb decreases. So that's why I called this the cobweb tam on my project page, because I already have my peas blossom beret, so now I have a cobweb tam, so clearly I need to make a mustard seed hat at some point. And then I think I have all of Titania's handmaidens from Midsummer Night's Dream. So my last finished object is partly a finished object and partly a work in progress. So I think we're going to save those to talk about a little bit later. Which means it is time for me to answer a viewer question. This is actually something that I got asked on Instagram, so I can't remember who it was because it's a lot harder to go back and scroll on Instagram. But basically, I got asked about picking up gusset stitches on socks. And so I went ahead and made a tutorial. My camera focus is a little sketchy, so I did edit it and it looks clear to me, but please let me know if the focusing is just too messy for you, and I'll try to re-record the next time I get to heels that need stitches picked up along the gusset. But I'm going to insert that now, and I will see you guys when you've watched that. And if you want to fast forward, I think it's about 8 minutes. I'll make a white screen appear so that you can jump if you're not interested in seeing how I pick up my stitches. I do also talk about a technique I do to avoid that little hole at the gusset. So in case that's useful to you, I'll see you guys very soon. Hello, I'm Eva, and I'm here to show you guys how I pick up gusset stitches on a top-down sock. So I've already knit the leg of the sock, and then I did a traditional heel flap. This is the Eye of Partridge slip stitch style. I did my heel turn, and now in order to begin knitting in the round again, I need to pick up stitches all along the heel flap, and these are called the gusset stitches. So all of the heel flap instructions that I've ever read, including the ones I follow, have you slip the first stitch of each row of the heel flap. And what that does is it creates this really nice chain of larger stitches. And these are what we're going to use to pick up the stitches. So when you finish turning the heel, or at least when I finish turning my heel, the yarn is on the right side of the needle. So first I need to move it over. We're back in focus. We're at the end of the heel turn, and we're ready to pick up our gusset stitches. I like to do it with a new needle. So I wrap the yarn around my right hand, and then what you want to do is, as I said, there's going to be a chain. And the stitches are slightly bigger than these stitches. and they'll be kind of folded towards the inside because stockinette curls. So in order to pick up the stitches, what you want to do is you want to go under both legs of the V. You don't want to just do this one because then, well, you can, but I find it easier to just do both because then you don't have this leg hanging out on your heel flap. Okay, so you put the tip through both V's, you wrap your yarn around just like you would to knit, and you've picked up one stitch. So we're just going to keep doing that down the whole chain while my camera rebels. Okay, so see how now there's another one. So now we have 2, 3, 4. I need more yarn. Okay, I think it's in focus. And see how you can still see that chain on the inside, and then on the other side are your new stitches and the regular heel flaps. So you want to see a little line of V's along the inside of the needle that you're working with. And as long as you've slipped the stitches, then you'll end up picking up one stitch for every 2 rows, of your heel flap. When I do the other side, I'll do it continental style just so that in case you really don't like having the yarn in your right hand, you can see what it's like. Oh, I caught another strand. There we go. Come on. It's difficult to knit and make your misbehaving camera focus at the same time. Clearly. Okay, so at this point we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I generally do a 32 row heel flap, so I usually end up with somewhere in the neighborhood of 16 stitches. I don't worry if it's not perfect. I also don't worry if I have more stitches on one side than the other because you're decreasing them down, so you'll be able to decrease to an even number. So now we have 16, but we're still a ways away. So since it looks like there's another stitch in the chain, I'm going to pick one up there so that we have 17 and just not worry about the fact that 17 is more than you might expect for 32 stitches. And now we have this. So a lot of people like to pick up stitches in the body of the sock as well in order to make sure that there are no holes. And I understand their reasoning, but watch what happens. So if I pick up a stitch into there without twisting it, it makes a hole where you didn't have one before. You can also pick it up. Okay, so this is what I did. To pick it up without twisting it, I just put the needle in like I was with my chain and put it under, and I got a hole. If you want to pick it up and twist it, what you do is you use your left needle to go into that same line and you twist it. But you still have a hole. It's not as big as it was, but it's still there. So instead, what I usually do is I just knit the next stitch without picking up anything. And I check and see if there's going to be a hole. A lot of the times, that will solve it on its own. In this case, it looks like there's a tiny hole when I push my finger there, but look what happens when I leave my finger alone. I'm not sure how close this lens can be in still focus. See how there's not really a hole? So that's my usual way of avoiding gusset holes, is that when I'm done picking up my stitches, I don't pick up into anything that doesn't look like this chain. Remember the chain that we were picking up into? So I don't pick up extra stitches in the body. Instead, what I do is I knit the first couple of stitches from the front of the sock onto the gusset needle. And for the first few rounds, I leave those 2 stitches there because that way the stress of a join is not at that part where you could develop a hole. Instead, it's over here where it'll be fine. So I'm going to knit across the instep and get to the other gusset, and I will see you in a minute. I'm back, and I'm at the final 2 stitches of the front of my sock. I believe it's called the instep. So I knit them in pattern, in this case purl and knit them, and now I'm ready to begin picking up stitches again. Now, as I said, I like to pick up stitches with an empty needle, but I also like to have the closest 2 stitches from the instep with the gussets. So all I do is I take my empty needle and I take those 2 worked stitches and pop them back on. And now I'm ready. Oh, I'm going to pick up the yarn continental style this time, picking up the stitches, just for you guys who would prefer to do that. Okay, so let's get it focusing again. And once again, I've got 2 stitches from the instep that have been on hold the whole time I've been doing a heel flap. And I'm just doing that so that it's really easy for me to tell if there's going to be a hole or not. So once again, I take the heel flap and I turn it a little. And then I find my focus square. And once again, are we in focus? Yeah. Okay, I find that chain of V's, and I'm going to go under both legs of the chain, and the first one is right here. So pick up the stitch and see how as soon as you snug it up, there's no hole at all. That's my usual experience. I think the other side of the gusset showed a little hole because there had been a yarn over in the row before that. But my usual experience is if I just start picking up into that chain, I never get holes. Whereas if I decide that this is too big a gap and I pick up into this stitch, look what happens. I get a hole. And even if I knit that twisted, hang on, which is what they would usually suggest if you're picking one up to avoid a hole, you still get this. And it's because, I mean, that's yarn, right? So you're putting tension on that yarn. And so you're actually creating more of a problem than if you just start picking up at the base of your chain and keep everything nice and snug. This is a yarn over, in case you're wondering. Okay. So now we're just going to pick up stitches all along the gusset chain again. Here it is. It's actually called a selvage chain. And we're going to go 1, 2, 3. My hats are off to anyone who does tutorial videos regularly and can knit and maintain the same plane all the time. Okay, so let's see if you guys can see what I'm doing. Perhaps this yarn was too light colored. Okay, so once again, I'm putting the tip of my right needle through both legs of the V, and then I'm just pulling the yarn through. This is harder for me in the left hand. Okay. And then I have a new stitch on my needle, and those V's are making a nice little chain inside. So you just go in underneath every one that you see. When I first began picking up stitches, I thought you needed 2 needles, and that turned out to be a giant hassle, and I thought that I hated picking up stitches. But now that I know how to pick them up with just 1 needle, it's a lot of fun. I apologize for stray hair and fur. It's spring, apparently we're all shedding. And sometimes when you're knitting your heel flap, you might forget to slip the stitches once, and then you'll just end up with 1 or 2 extras. It's really not that big a deal. You can decrease them down. Okay, so last one, we go down and under, down and through, I guess. Under and through. Not really sure what prepositions we should be using. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So awesome, I have the same count on both sides. That doesn't always happen, but when it doesn't, I just do 1 more decrease round on one side than the other. Okay, so once again, here's our heel flap. This is the outside of the heel flap. This is all the stitches I've just picked up. And if you look on the inside, you should see a nice pretty chain. My camera is thwarting me. There we go. So that is how I pick up my gusset stitches. And as I said before, for the first 4 to 6 rounds that I'll be doing, I leave 2 stitches from the instep. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll stop moving it around. I bet you guys are seasick by now. I leave 2 stitches from the instep on the gusset needle, just to make sure that the part of the fabric where you don't want to hole, the gusset holes, is not under any strain from joining. You could also do this if you were knitting them on 2 circulars. It would be pretty easy to just pop the stitches over. If you're magic looping, you'll have to move where your loop is. But once again, that's not too big of a hassle. And I think it's worth it because you end up with a fabric without any gusset holes. Hang on, let me show you the first sock that I did, because that one is completed and I used the same method of picking up. So here's where I picked up the stitches, and here's where the join is, and see there's absolutely no hole there, even though I don't pick up any extra stitches. I just make sure that the yarn is nice and snug. And here is the other side. So I hope that that helped. Of course, once you've picked up your gusset stitches, what you're going to do is decrease every other round until you're at whatever stitch count you want for your foot. I oftentimes make my foot a couple stitches smaller than I've made my leg, just because the bottom of the sole is in stockinette, and so it doesn't draw in, and I'm often knitting patterns on the leg that do draw in. So I've turned it inside out just so that you can see again that there's that nice pretty chain of V's running along the inside, and this is where you've picked up the stitches. Well, there you go, another tutorial. I hope that that helps if you've had problems picking up stitches in the past. I used to think it was terrible, and now I actually really enjoy picking up stitches. So if my method helps you, great, and if it didn't make any sense, then ignore it and try another method. Bye! Now it's time to talk about works in progress. And first I will show you my formalized curiosity cardigan, which you've seen before. This is my summer cardigan, which I made one last year, and then I'm making one this year, and I'm sure I'll make one next year out of Quince & Company's Sparrow, which is their organic linen fingering weight yarn. And in the summer, I like to cover my arms so that they don't get sunburnt and tanned and that kind of stuff. So having really lightweight long sleeve toppers is really useful for me. And I love the cardigan that I made last year, so I'm really looking forward to finishing this one. I do a lace body, and this year I am making the lace cardigan from the book The Art of Seamless Knitting. And as you can see, I'm getting there. I've got the body done, one of the sleeves done, and the other sleeve is maybe 3 inches from being done. So then I'll just have the neckband and the button bands. I followed the directions for the cardigan pretty much word for word for the body, and I love this lace pattern. It's called chandelier lace in the book. Is it going to show up? Come on, focus. There we go. And I love how the Sparrow yarn behaves in lace. I think it's really well suited for that. Oh, and this is the Nanny Berry colorway, which is a really beautiful rose pink. As I was saying, I followed the directions almost as described for the body of the cardigan. The only difference was I wanted the bust to be a little bit smaller, so instead of doing an 11-stitch side seam, I did a 5-stitch side seam. But then when I got to the band, they recommend a 2x2 rib band. And I just feel like this lace is so beautiful and delicate and based on twisted stitches. And I really wanted the bands to reflect that. So instead of doing just a 2x2 rib, what I did was a 1x2 rib, and the knit stitch is a twisted knit instead of a purl. And as you can see, that really grows out. of the lace stitch. And then they have 3/4 length sleeves, but I'm doing full sleeves for the extra sun protection, and I did the same cuff there. I was saying linen yarn lacks the elasticity of wool yarn, and so the ribbing is not going to be particularly stretchy regardless, so it's more for looks than anything else. So that's the other reason why I felt fine getting away with that. And then I had it end at my natural waist so that if I want to wear it over a dress, you know, it hits at a nice place proportionally for me. I'm going to do the neckband in the same ribbing that I'm using for the waistband. But I haven't decided yet about the button bands. The pattern is so beautifully vertical that I almost want to do a vertical button band, and so I'm debating between whether to just do I-cord or if I should do a more substantial button band and then seam it in so that it can be vertical instead of horizontal. I'll try on the cardigan once I've done the neckband and the sleeves and decide whether I need that 1/2 inch that I was planning on or if I can get away with just a couple things of I-cord. So we will see. And then the other modification I'm making is, as the book's title would, you know, imply, this cardigan, the sleeves are knit in the round, but the cardigan I made out of Sparrow last year also had sleeves knit in the round, and they bias a bit. It's not a huge amount, and by bias I mean they twist a little. But it is there, and I've read that if you knit flat, that can help avoid any tendency to bias. Linen yarn is just more likely to do that. I'm not really sure why. So I'm knitting the sleeves flat and then seaming them up. And I am purl agnostic. I don't really mind purling. So it's not a big deal to me, and I love seaming. So you can see I already seamed up the first sleeve just to make sure that the sizing worked before I went ahead and knit an entire second sleeve. And yeah, linen yarn is not as enjoyable to work with as wool, but it's just so wonderful to wear with in the summer, and as long as I don't do too many rounds at once, then it's a fun project. I'm really enjoying seeing it come together, and I can't wait to wear the finished cardigan. And luckily, the lace pattern is a 6-round repeat, and so I've clearly got it memorized at this point, having done the sleeves. So I like it once I've memorized a chart so that I can just pick up my knitting and go instead of having to constantly read things. As I said, I haven't been knitting too much. So a few days ago, I decided to try to get my knitting mojo back by casting on a vanilla sock. I have never knit a vanilla sock before. I just really enjoy patterning, and yeah. I also worry that when I knit plain stockinette in the round, I knit really quickly, and so I worry that I would go through yarn at a frantic pace if I was only knitting vanilla socks. So for those reasons, I've just never gotten around to knitting a plain one. But I had this yarn, which is Bergère de France, and it's the shell colorway. Oh, that's pretty accurate. And since it's variegated in like a self-striping manner, I didn't want to mess with it with a pattern. So I cast on for my first vanilla sock, and here it is. I knit it with 60 stitches because that's the stitch count that tends to work for me when I'm knitting on size zeros. I get 8 to 9 stitches an inch on size zeros, depending on the yarn. Well, sometimes I've gotten 7.5 stitches when it's a plump yarn. Anyway, so I did my favorite tubular cast on and then a 1x1 twisted rib cuff, not too long. And then I did a shorter leg because I wanted to be able to wear these socks with my Oxfords and my flat shoes, and I've noticed that the length that I knit socks to wear with boots is a little long to wear them with my flats. And then because it was a patterned sock, I decided to try the Fish Lips Castile again. I tried this for the first time over Christmas break with the self-striping yarn that I was using, because if you do a traditional heel flap and gusset, you're increasing the stitches, and that means that your pattern stripes are going to be more narrow, and I don't like the idea of that. So I wanted something that wouldn't interrupt the patterning, and I really enjoyed making the fish lips kiss heel last time, but it doesn't fit me as well as a heel flapping gusset. So this time I followed the directions for people with a higher arch, and I went ahead and increased just 2 stitches. It suggests increasing 2 to 6 stitches. So I increased 2 stitches and then decrease them again at the end, which makes a deeper heel, and it definitely fits me better. So I won't know until I wear the pair, obviously, whether it works for all day wear, but trying it on, I was impressed with the fit. So hopefully I'll be able to use that more. And in order to make sure that this didn't change, I used a different, I used a separate amount of yarn for the heel. What I did was I looked at other people's projects in this colorway, so I knew the order of the design, and I decided I wanted this dark color at the cuff. So then, of course, I had to pull out yarn before I started the sock until I got to the dark color. And so I just used that yarn that I had pulled out to do the heel, and it just coincidentally was the same color as the stripe in the body was. You can see where I added the new yarn for the heel because that row of cream, that's where the heel starts. So I'm calling these my beach cottage socks because the colors are really marled and lovely and faded, and they look like something you've worn a lot, and it's really comfy, and maybe the sun has faded it a bit. So I really love how they've turned out, and I just did my usual round toe. So yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. I want matching socks, so I will once again pull out yarn until I get to the starting point. I'm going to have to pull out not too much yarn, I don't think, because it looks like after this comes that. So since the toe ended with that light gray color. That's the way to match, by the way. You have to pull out the yarn until you're at the beginning of a color repeat for the first sock, so that then you can match it for the second sock, which works pretty well. So I will probably cast on the second sock later today and just have it sitting in my basket for when I don't want to think about my knitting, and I can just pull it up and knit a few rounds. I can understand why people really enjoy patterning yarn and vanilla socks because it's just very meditative and relaxing, and you get to the point where you just want to do one more round to see what color is going to appear next. So I can definitely understand why they've taken the knitting world by storm. I'm going to have to start a new segment, and I'll be back to talk about my other work in progress. Once I had finished my first vanilla sock, and I think it only took me a day because of the shorter leg and then, as I said, stuck in it in the round and I decided that rather than casting on for the second one right away, I wanted to knit a sock with the other patterned yarn that I have in my stash, which is a Regia colorway. Oh well. Okay. So it's this yarn. And it's the Storm colorway, and notice that it's not actually self-striping, which I kind of thought it was. Instead, it's more of a raggedy variegated. And once I realized that, I thought I wouldn't like it, so I ordered some mauve yarn from Knit Picks, and I was going to do the broken seed stitch socks with it. However, that mauve yarn is a much thicker yarn, so I didn't really think that the two would stripe well together. And so I was planning to place an order from Love Knitting for the sweater yarn for my sister's sweater. And since they carry the Regia yarns, I thought I would go ahead and knit up a sock from that yarn to decide if I wanted to have a contrasting color or not. That was very convoluted. I apologize. The point is that I cast on for this sock, which I named my Summer Storm socks. And this is not a plain vanilla sock. Instead, it is the Scatterbee pattern, which is a free pattern on Ravelry. And it's really clever. It's a slip stitch pattern. And the rhythm actually reminds me a lot of the Hermione's Everyday Socks. It's just 4 stitches, 4 rounds, really simple and quick to memorize. And since it slip stitches, it breaks up pooling a bit. And so when I placed my order, I had knit about this much, and I was like, oh, that'll be fine. I'm going to really enjoy this sock, you know. It's a little out of my comfort zone, but still enjoyable. So I placed the order, and then this happened. I do not really care for the very dramatic break between the dark and the light, and then back to dark and back to light and back. Like, it just looks really awkward to me. It makes me not want to buy any Regia ever again. So I think I've learned from this that if I'm going to buy multicolored yarn, it should be self-striping and not just like randomness. So I did another fish lips kiss heel on this one so that I wouldn't interrupt the patterning again. But yeah, I'm really torn about this sock. I can see wearing it with like my ankle boots because then only this would come up, but I'm just not sure. I mean, I have so many pairs of socks. It's not like I need a pair to keep my feet warm. I should only have socks that are aesthetically pleasing, you know what I mean? So I'm thinking about ripping this out and instead doing the broken seed stitch sock with some nature spun fingering that I have left over from some fingerless mitts I made a couple years ago. And there is quite a bit of cream in this section, but I could always just break the yarn and jump over that section. And the broken seed stitch sock is another free pattern on Ravelry, and I just think that I would like it a lot more. So I think that that is what I'm going to do. So this is a work in progress, but I've put it in hibernation, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to end up frogged. I definitely want to do that slip stitch pattern again, though, at some point, because it was very fun, and I really like the results. Here, let me show you. In the individual sections of how it broke up the variegation. It's just, I don't like that super abrupt change. I think it looks bad. I think it looks like a mistake. And there it is, a little stretch. And the fabric that slip stitch makes is really nice and cozy. I would certainly recommend this pattern. But yeah, this is my first experience with both Regia and Bergère de France yarn, and it has convinced me that if I want to buy patterned European sock yarn in the future, I should go with the French one, because I'm just not pleased with this. I know that the Arnie and Carlos line of Regia is really popular with a lot of knitters, but I'm so annoyed with this that it makes me like not want to buy from Regia ever again, because I don't understand why they would do such abrupt color changes. Really, I think I'm a solid and semi-solid knitter at heart, because then I have more control over it. But I think that the abrupt color changes will look a lot less abrupt when I've got the white yarn striped in with it. So those are my plans for that. So obviously I won't be casting on the second sock anytime soon. Maybe once I finish my vanilla socks, I'll try doing a broken seed stitch sock as well, and then frog this if I like the broken seed stitch sock more. But you know, more hours of knitting from the same skein of yarn. And I believe that's everything in my knitting basket. So now we can get to the more general topics. So socks are my first love. Obviously, I have been rejuvenating my knitting mojo by turning back to socks. They're the reason why I began knitting. And really, socks, hats, and sweaters are what I enjoy knitting the most. And as I said, I pretty much only knit patterned socks. So I thought it would be fun to just kind of talk about some general tips and tricks that I've picked up over 3 years of sock knitting. And the first one I would say is that if you're new to pattern socks, try to find a pattern with ribbing in it. There are all kinds of decorative ribbing patterns for free on Ravelry. and in various books that you can get from your library. And it's just so much easier to get the fit right when there's ribbing, because it just makes the fabric a lot obviously stretchier, and so it'll conform to your foot and you don't have to worry so much about how it's going to change adding a pattern to it. So that being said, obviously if you're making lace socks, then you probably need fewer stitches than you would for a vanilla sock. And if you're making cabled socks or twisted stitch socks, then you're probably going to want a few more stitches, because cables draw fabric in and lace expands fabric. I also learned from reading Cookie A's Sock Innovation, and I kind of noticed this with my own socks, but I hadn't realized it exactly, so that's why I'm crediting her, is that lace, adding yarn overs makes your fabric a lot less elastic. So it's not just that it makes the fabric bigger, it's also that it just makes it less likely to hug your foot. And so that's why if you like if you like it close fit on your socks, then either a lace rib pattern or just going down quite a few stitches is what you're going to need to do. Otherwise, you're going to end up with slouchy socks. I enjoy having a mix of very fitted and slouchy socks in my drawer, so I don't regret the lace socks that I've made on more stitches, but just something to be aware of. Let's see, what else is there? I really enjoy doing my socks top down. I started with toe-up socks because I got that book from the library and it just sounded like it would be easier. But for me, it's a lot easier to fit top-down socks, and my arch and foot shape in general suit a gusset very well, and doing a gusset from the top down is a lot simpler, I think. So basically, unless there's a compelling reason for me to do toe-up socks, like I'm trying to make the most of yarn, or the stitch pattern is directional and it looks better going up than down, then I'm probably going to stick with top down. Like the Scatterbee socks that I showed you, they're written for a toe-up pattern, and I just changed it to top down. Let's see, what else? A lot of sock patterns that you'll find are based on multiples of 4, 6, and 8, so it can be pretty easy to modify the leg of the sock, but then if you get to the heel turn and you don't know much about socks yet because you haven't knit that many socks, then there's this really useful web page that gives you the numbers for all kinds of different heels, like laid out in a table, so you can be like, oh, I'm going to do a 60 stitch sock, and then you can follow those numbers down, and that way if you've changed the leg part of, why did I want to say recipe, of a pattern, then you get to the heel and you don't have the same amount of stitches, this web page is really useful for helping you figure out how many stitches. I still use it frequently if I want to try out a new heel or something. Generally, you're turning a heel over the center third of the stitches, just in case you want a general reference. But I'll include a link to that webpage in the show notes because I find it very useful. And of course, once you get to the foot of the sock, you can always decrease more on the sole because it's not going to affect the pattern, if that makes sense. So I often decrease a few stitches on the sole depending on what my pattern is like on the leg, just to make it nice and snug. I don't mind having a slouchy leg, but I don't really want a slouchy foot, because then when I put my shoes on, the sock kind of slides, and that's no good. I think that those are pretty much all of my favorite techniques. I've already told you guys that I default to a tubular cast on and 1x1 twisted rib. And if I'm doing toe up, I still do the 1x1 twisted rib, assuming there's no other, assuming I don't need the ribbing to grow out of the pattern. And then I do the invisible 1x1 sewn bind off. And then for my toes, I have a very wide toe box, so I alternate decrease rounds for 4 rounds, and then I decrease every round for another 4 rounds, and then I Kitchener or graft it all together, because since I'm starting at 60 stitches around there, that I'm usually grafting, I stop to graft somewhere between 13 and 15 stitches, so almost 2 inches, which fits my foot. So if you have a round toe, you could always try that out. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say on that topic. Knitting socks is really fun, and knitting pattern socks is even more fun because you're adding this whimsy and a lot of aesthetic appeal to a very utilitarian object. So I would definitely encourage you to try a pair of pattern socks if you've stuck to vanilla ones. Now for Knits in the Wild. For those who are new, this is where I take photographs of knitted items that I've been wearing and insert them while I voiceover explain them to you. So these are from April when the weather was much cooler. And first I have my Peas Blossom Beret, which I wore with a cream wool scarf and my gray trench coat. Then I wore my Hint of Snow tam and Winter Morn gloves, which are both made out of Quince & Company's Turn, so the same colorway. Boothbay blue? Yeah, and then they both also have cream beading to kind of make them look a set. And I wore them with my navy blue velvet blazer. And then I wore my Cottage Garden shawl, which is a pattern I made up myself. The yarn is Manos del Uruguay Silk Blend. I think it's DK weight. And I wore that 2 different ways, both more quirky, I guess, than mainstream. So first up, I wore it with a brown sleeveless dress layered over a long-sleeved gray dress. And I wore it to go grocery shopping, hence the props in the photo. I try to make it look a little more like everyday wear. And then I also wore it with a cream blouse layered over a gray long-sleeve t-shirt with a nice full skirt when I wanted to go full-on quirky, because sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I just enjoy that. It's fun to be able to dress differently depending on my mood that day. So those are the Knits in the Wild, and that segment will probably be on hold until fall since I don't really wear much knitwear in the summer. I overheat quickly, so instead I'm going to start doing yarn reviews to replace that segment. And now we can talk about the knit along. So this is going to be a very small knit along. I know that there are always lots of knit alongs happening, and that sometimes people can feel overwhelmed by participation. So I'm pretty sure that most of you can find the time for this if you're interested. And it is going to be a bookmark knit along. So I will show you the other thing, that they're finished objects, but I have it down as a work in progress because I'm not sure if I want to make more. So as I said last episode, I wanted to start playing with Fair Isle knitting. And after I made my wall hanging, I decided I wanted to do something smaller to kind of explore the different ways that colors can interact and get to know the Alice Starmore yarn better, because a lot of the colors are heathered, which means that they suddenly look very different when you put them in different combinations. And so I decided to make some bookmarks. The first one I don't have anymore, so I'll insert a photo here. It's a combination of reds and yellows for my friend who loves reds, and I already gave it away, so that's why I can't show it to you. And then I made one for myself. Is there going to be another focusing issue? Come on, camera. Well, I'll try to get a couple up. So I made one for myself, and then my mom, sister, and niece all requested them. So I thought I would show you the one I made for my sister first because she wanted the same colors as me. Here we go. Okay. You can find, I have one project page for all the bookmarks, so you can find the details. Each of them takes about 5 grams of yarn, which really is not that much. So I can kind of feel free to experiment without feeling like I'm, gonna lose a lot of yarn. So these include quite a few of the same colors, just in different combinations, and then they have a couple different ones, but they both include, I think there's 1 or 2 colors different in them. Obviously this one has the Pebble Beach, which this one does not have. And then this one has the Selkie on the outside. So it's just interesting to me how you can get a very different effect from the same colors of yarn. And these colors are obviously my kinds of colors, and so I think I'm going to try to design a hat using these colors and using some of this for inspiration. So I'll probably start swatching for that the next time I want to play with Fair Isle. So that's been really fun. And then my niece requested hot pink, which really surprised me because her favorite colors have been blue and brown for years now. She's not been a stereotypical pink girl, but apparently now she is. I love pink, so obviously I'm not going to complain. Oh, come on, focus. When in doubt, begin a new segment. So this is the one that I made for her. And what I wanted to do, I've been looking up color theory. So since she requested hot pink, I thought I would try a split complementary color combination. So I looked at greens, and then the direct opposite of green on the color wheel is red. So the split complementary takes the two colors on either side of that. So orange and then fuchsia, basically. So that's what I did. As you can see, I did the pink and the orange in the background, and then the two different shades of green in the foreground. And I wanted to see, because that light green and the orange are quite close in value, and by that I mean value is how light or dark a color looks, like if you take a photo in black and white, so if that makes sense. And I wanted to see if the fact that they were complementary colors or hues would make that green stand out enough. And I don't think it did. So value is definitely the most important thing when combining colors in Fair Isle. And it's proven surprisingly tricky. A lot of the Alice Starmore yarns, even though they're different colors, a lot of them are very close in value. So I am slowly learning about that and learning to compromise and learning about different ways to combine them. Obviously, Alice Starmore herself combines them in beautiful design. So it's not the yarn, it's just me trying to learn kind of a new language, I suppose. But it's been a lot of fun. So my mom requested a blue bookmark. So I did a monochromatic color scheme for her, which just means all the colors are blue, just different shades. And values. So I used darker blue for the background and then very pale blues for the foreground, because light colors tend to stand out more than dark colors. And so I was worried that if I did the background in the pale blues, then somehow that would dominate and this crispness would be lost. I wanted it to look kind of like stars at midnight. So there's that one. And as you can see, I did some shading to make it warmer towards the middle. And actually, a lot of times I think Fair Isle looks best when you back up your view a bit. So there are those two. And then these two again, I'm calling these herbarium because these colors remind me of floral and vegetable colors, but when you've dried them out versus, you know, when they're new and summery, these are like the wintry versions, I guess you would say. And so with this one, I did bands of color, the one that I made for myself. And then I was interested in obviously dark versus light and that kind of stuff. And then for my sisters, I tried, instead of shading just from darker to lighter, I shaded from one color to the next in the foreground. And I got the idea from this great book, The Art of Fair Isle Knitting, which I'm sure I'll review on the podcast soon. It's just the book I wanted to review today is about socks, since we were talking about socks. Oh, there we go. Almost. I'm going to focus. And what I loved about it was it gave very concrete ideas for different ways that you can shade your yarn. So once I made this one, I felt like I'd really started to get the hang of things you can do with Fair Isle knitting. And so I definitely want to play more in the future. I'm just taking a bit of a break because my brain was feeling overwhelmed. Since I haven't been feeling well, That affects my like mental capabilities as well as my physical capabilities. So I just haven't been up to trying to play with the yarn and that kind of thing and picking out the patterns. Most of these patterns I got from Alice Starmore's Art of Fair Isle Knitting book, her pattern directory. A couple times I modified them a bit, like this one, to try to fit within my preferred stitch count. And the way I made these bookmarks was using the swatching directions from the Knit Sonic book. So they're knit in the round, and then you steek it into this lovely little fringe. So it's a very fun way to knit them. And back to the knit along. I'm sorry, I got distracted there by my own knitting. So it's a bookmark knit along. And I should really say craft along because you're welcome to crochet or weave or whatever you like. And what I have really enjoyed about making the bookmarks is that it's a very low commitment. Is that the word I want? You can, basically, I really like that I can experiment with new things, but I'm only using a small amount of yarn. It only uses a small amount of time. It takes about an hour to knit one of these. And so I don't have to worry that I've committed myself to this giant project when it could go terribly wrong. So that's what I've been really enjoying. And with the Alice Starmore yarn, at least, even though it's knit in stockinette, once it's blocked out, it doesn't roll. I did do, oh, and this is different than the Knit Sonic swatching directions. I did an I-cord cast on and bind off just to make that a nice edge. I just love I-cord, as I think we can tell by now. Because I did the I-cord bind off on the lace cardigan that I'm doing too. So basically you can either find a pattern for a bookmark and follow the pattern, or you can just use it as a little swatch to try out some ideas. Maybe you want to try colored work knitting too. Maybe you've never steeked before, so you want to try steeking. Maybe you want to do cables or Guernsey style texture. Pretty much anything goes. If you want to try out crocheting or weaving, that's welcome. And just have fun with it. You can make as many bookmarks as you like or as few bookmarks as you like, as long as you finish one. And it's going to run through the end of July. I'm only going to have one thread because I think it's more fun when you can share your finished objects and talk in the same thread. And I'll just worry about how to draw for the prize when August arrives. So it will be lovely when you post your finished object if you talk about kind of what you learned from making it, just so that we can all benefit from your wisdom. And the prize is going to be the yarn that I showed you last time from Sweet Sparrow Yarns. This is the Sarah Crew colorway on her House Wren base, and it's 100 grams of fingering weight yarn. So socks, shawls, hat, and gloves, whatever you want to do with it. And Julie sent it to me very nicely. She surprised me with it when I bought yarn from her. So I thought it would be a very good prize for this because Sarah Crew is the heroine of A Little Princess, and a lot of the colorways in Julie's shop are inspired by books. So I thought it would be fun to do it as a prize for a bookmark knit along. It is superwash yarn, and it's a lovely tweed. So that will be the prize. All you have to do is knit at least, or crochet, make with yarn at least one bookmark and post a photo of it and any lessons or interesting things that you learned by July 31st. And I will lock that thread on August 1st and draw a winner, and feel free to talk and share inspiration and feedback and all that kind of stuff. And you will find the thread in the Ravelry group, which is the charm of it, and there will be a link in the show notes. I'll be posting photos of my bookmarks. Obviously, I'm not going to enter to win, although I'm tempted. But talking a little bit more about what I've learned about combining colors and that kind of thing. And I just like how the bookmarks are so small that if it's not a complete success, it doesn't really matter. It's just a learning experience, and you still end up with a lovely, useful object, assuming that you read. And I have found that people really enjoy getting them as gifts too, so that's nice, a little low gift commitment. Whew. All I have left is some talk about books. So, oh, and then since I told you guys that I would try to share a podcast, another podcast every episode, this time I thought I would talk about Stitching Between Pages, whose host is Robin, and she is another American. She lives in Chicago, and she is getting a PhD in medieval studies. And in addition to talking about knitting, at the end she includes a segment about a book that she really enjoys reading. Sometimes it's related to medieval history, most of the time it's not. And I really enjoy that as well. And if you're not interested in that, you can always just stop since she puts it at the end, which I think is really nice. And yeah, so she's one that I've been watching her back episodes a lot lately, and she's just really enthusiastic, and she has cats, and she does different projects. She does quite a few shawls, which is really neat for me since I'm still trying to decide whether I'm a shawl person or not at heart. So I will start one last recording to talk about books. I have a knitting book to talk about, and then just a little passage about knitting from a novel that I've read recently. Thought I'd share the passage first. So this is from Thin Air by Anne Cleves, which is a mystery book from her Shetland series. I bought this at my library's used book section for $1, and I didn't realize it was the most recent book in the series, and it turns out there's some pretty major spoilers. So although I would really recommend her writing, and reading this I think I've read like 5 of her books now in the past 2 weeks. I really enjoy her style of writing and the way she sets up her mysteries and her characters, but I would definitely recommend reading the Shetland series in order if you don't want some pretty epic spoilers. So obviously, since this one is set on Shetland, which has a very strong knitting tradition, so Anne Cleves mentions knitting a few times in this one. First of all, one of the detectives has walked into a kitchen. Yeah, okay. They turned around to stare at her, still speechless. Then they saw Perez behind her, and the questions came tumbling out, one after another, the voices of a chorus of well-bred noise. A motherly woman sat in the corner, knitting hand-spun yarn. So that was the first knitting one, and the woman sitting in the corner is a police officer who has, I guess, instead of being an investigator, she's more of a community officer, so she's been keeping an eye on all the suspects until the investigators can get over. Let's see. And another point, so that group that the detective walked in on, they're a group of English people who are visiting Shetland for the weekend. And so one of the English women, her boyfriend is with her, and he reached into his pocket and brought out a pair of hand-knitted Fair Isle gloves. A present, he said. She leaned across the table to kiss him. So I thought that would be a very nice present, especially since gloves are pretty fiddly to hand knit. And let's see. So the final one that I marked, I bet there were more in this book though, is she arrived 20 minutes later carrying a woven bag with fine yarn and knitting needles sticking out of the top. He left her in the kitchen watching a period drama on the small television set there, the shawl she was working on spread over her lap. And that's that same community police officer, and that made me smile because I suspect many of us sit down with a period drama and our knitting spread out over our lap. So that was Anne Cleves' Thin Air, and her other mystery series is actually the one that I've gotten really, really into because the main character, the investigator there, her name is Vera, and she is middle-aged and happily single, and she's just so different from the types of female characters that you usually see. She's not at all maternal, and she's quite caustic, her internal dialogue that of course you have access to because you're reading a book set in her world. So I find it incredibly refreshing, and I also think Anne Cleves is very good at creating scenes, so her descriptive abilities are very powerful. I travel along with her characters as they go about their business, and she writes very interesting characters and compelling plots, so I would highly recommend her if you're looking for enjoyable books. She's not terribly cheerful. I would not describe her as cozy mysteries. The Shetland books are darker than the Vera books, in my view. But she's also not super pessimistic. Like, they're not hard-boiled. And they're traditional in the sense that you have a group of suspects, and Anne Cleves always leaves clues for you to figure out which suspect it is. But she's really good at making the clues really subtle. So it's quite a challenge sometimes to figure out the killer, which I love. So definitely recommend this if you enjoy those style mysteries. And finally, a knitting book to review, Custom Socks. Take another sip of water. Knit to Fit Your Feet by Kate Atherley. I was sent this book by a friend who she ordered the book from Amazon, and this copy arrived and it was a bit beat up, and so Amazon sent her a new copy and she offered to send me this one. So thank you, Erin. I'm going to first talk about the patterns because the book is about half technique, well, maybe 2/3 technique and 1/3 patterns. I love all the patterns in this book. Here's a few photos. I would knit pretty much all of the decorative ones, and they all come in a really wide side range, which is exciting for me because as someone who fits best into a 60-stitch sock, I often have to modify, and some ones I just can't modify well enough because I don't like sizing up or down a needle size. And not only are all of the patterns just really lovely and aesthetically pleasing, she also includes a whole bunch of techniques with each one. Like there's a pretty cable one. So she talks about the methods that she has used to make multiple sizes. She includes both toe up and top down versions of each. And so they really become kind of like mini knitting classes, the patterns. So I really love that. As for the first part, which is the technique section and talks about all the information you would need to knit a sock and make it fit you, I have kind of mixed feelings about that. I don't think this would necessarily be the best book for someone who's never knit a pair of socks to pick up because she sometimes presents things that are contrary to traditional sock knitting wisdom, and I don't think it's always clearly marked which things are definitely her opinions versus which things are generally accepted wisdom that she is sharing for your benefit. For instance, she doesn't graft toes, so I just feel like, and just some of the directions that she had, like she doesn't reinforce heel flaps, and she finds grafting and enforced heels and all that unnecessary, which is fine, but I think that if you're going to write a book for beginners, and this is clearly aimed at beginners because it starts with how to cast on, then I think it's good to be a little bit more clear about when you're going kind of off the map, so to speak. I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to think of a diplomatic way to say that. Like, when I was reading through the technique section, my eyebrows kept raising. But, you know, I've never tried just doing a drawstring toe. Maybe it does work. So, and then there were just little things that kept making me put my eyebrows up. So I'm not sure if I would recommend this to a total beginner, just because, I don't know. I think that there are other books that are better for total beginners. That being said, there's a lot of information in the book that I think could be very useful once you've gotten a couple socks under your belt and you want to figure out how to improve or perfect, customize, I guess, would be appropriate considering the title, and you already know kind of what your problem areas are and that kind of thing, then this is very useful because not only does she tell you how different sizing can work, and she includes a lot of tables so you don't necessarily have to do all the math yourself if you don't want to. But she also includes directions on how to modify patterns that have stitches, pattern socks. She includes directions for how to modify pattern socks without going up or down in needle size. So that's really neat. I will say that I prefer Sock Innovation by Cookie A for those directions, but when I was a beginning knitter and I looked at Sock Innovation by Cookie A, I was completely overwhelmed. So I think that this one would be better for people who aren't comfortable modifying patterns yet. This would definitely start you on the road to pattern modification for socks. And I think areas of knitting always spill over. So if you understand how to change socks and maintain that pattern integrity, then that's going to help you when you're looking at a sweater that you want to modify. So this is definitely worth a read, and I just really love the patterns, so I'm distracting myself by flipping through. You can see all the patterns that are included on Ravelry, of course. So for that alone, it's worth it because there are quite a few patterns in this book, and since if you do paid for patterns on Ravelry, they're $5 or $6 a piece. But I will caution beginners to perhaps read a couple other sock books at the same time. I really like Charlene Schurz. I'll include it in the show notes. I found her sock knitting handbook very useful when I was a beginner knitter because she talks about how the different heels are going to affect fit and that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess that's my review. I definitely like the patterns. I have more mixed feelings about the method, and I feel like if it was your first pair of socks, you wouldn't necessarily end up with the best fitting socks if you just followed her method. But it's hard for me to tell because I've knit a lot of socks, if that makes sense. So take that for what it's worth. I definitely prefer this to the sock architecture book. I apologize for all of my ums and hesitations. It's tricky for me to review books that I have mixed feelings about because I want to be diplomatic and I don't want to insult what is clearly a lot of work that has gone into this book. I think it is well worth a read. I just would not necessarily recommend it to complete beginners. And yes, for me, this book it's a lot easier to follow than the sock architecture book. And that probably just depends on how your brain works. Here I am umming again. There's a whole lot of technique information in here, so I can see how a lot of the technique things would be really useful if you haven't knit many socks yet, because they're the kinds of tricks that you tend to pick up as you go or as you read more and more sock patterns. And she even shows you how to, tell which yarns are best for socks. So it's definitely packed full of information, but in a way that is pleasant to read. It's just some of her ideas are definitely not mainstream. Take that for what you will. And I believe that is everything. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Oh, the book is going to make a run for it. This will help me. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much to everyone who came over because of Ella. Ella is a knitting celebrity, and I cannot believe that she mentioned me on one of her videos. If you don't know who I'm talking about, it's Ella Gordon, and she is a Shetland knitter who works for Jamieson and Smith. And she has just come out with the most beautiful Croft Hoose pattern, which is a free hat pattern to celebrate Shetland Wool Week, and it's a Fair Isle hat, and I will definitely be knitting it eventually. I just want to save up until I can order the yarn from her. And I still need to decide colors because there's so many beautiful colors. Anyway, so I just wanted to give a few people have gotten in touch with me saying that they found me thanks to Ella, so I wanted to go ahead and mention that and say thank you. And I apologize again for the delay in the episode. Honestly, my health is just being a little crazy right now, and I have family visiting again next month. So I'm not going to make any guarantees about the next episode, except that there will be at least one in July. And please come along and join in the bookmark knit along or just chat in general. I just really enjoy getting to know you, and I'm still just amazed and grateful that anyone wants to listen to me rambling, to be honest. So I will see you guys hopefully sooner rather than later, but definitely eventually. And happy knitting, everyone! All of that talking, and I forgot to mention who had won the Alice Starmore color card. So I went ahead and locked the thread in the group this morning and put the numbers into random number generator. And Lucy LW has won. Her name is Lucy, and I actually know her from Instagram, and she sometimes guest stars in her daughter's video podcast, which is the Sampler Girl. So it's really fun. I'm looking forward to sending a package to her. She's very cheerful and she's a great person, so I'm looking forward to that. And her discussion on the entry thread was of this really cool purse that she made on a knitting cruise to Norway a couple years ago. So how wonderful is that? I would love to go on a knitting tour of Scandinavia. Probably not a cruise. I'm not really a cruise person, but a tour would definitely be fabulous. So congrats to Lucy. I will give this a week just in case you watch the podcast and want to be surprised, and then get in touch with you. And yeah, thanks to everyone who entered. I really enjoyed reading about your projects. I couldn't reply to them, obviously, because that would have changed the numbers. But now I will go ahead and reply to them now. So it was just wonderful seeing all that Fair Isle inspiration. Thank you so much.